Welcome to St. James. St. James has served the Catholic community in Del Mar and Solana Beach since 1911. Our present church was dedicated in 1982 on the Feast of St. James and features many elements that remind us of the saint himself. So who is this St. James anyway? There are actually 5 people in the New Testament that have the name James. Let's look at each one. There was James, the father of Judas, one of the 12. Not Judas Iscariot. People sometimes forget that there were 2 apostles named Judas. There was James, the son of Alphaeus, one of the 12, of which nothing whatever is known. There is a mention of James the Younger in Mark's Gospel, who may be the same as James, the son of Alphaeus, but once again, nothing is known of this James. In Mark and Matthew's Gospel, we hear of James, the brother of Jesus. He was not an apostle of Jesus, but an early leader of the church in Jerusalem. This James wrote the letter of James that we find in our New Testament. He was martyred in the 60s AD. Finally, there is James, the brother of John, one of Zebedee's sons, a member of the 12. He was clearly one of Jesus' favorites, often mentioned in the same breath as Peter and John. He was present at the transfiguration of Jesus and famously requested to share the same cup as Jesus. He was martyred a mere 11 years after the death of Jesus. This last James is our guy. Sometimes referred to as St. James the Greater to distinguish him from James the son of Alphaeus, the legend has it that James traveled to Spain after the resurrection. Whether he did or not, his tomb has been claimed by the town of Compostela, Spain. From the earliest days of the church, pilgrims from all across Europe embarked on the Way, a pilgrimage to Compostela. The most famous walk starts in southern France, then meanders through northern Spain, a journey of several hundred miles. Many St. James parishioners have made this hike, and all speak with reverent awe at the power of such a pilgrimage. We know from the Bible that St. James was a fisherman. Illustrating his vocation is the shell, a motif repeated in many delightful ways throughout the church itself. Even the shape of our church reminds us of a shell, sheltering us from the elements. Even the altar and ambo are scalloped to evoke the shell image we see everywhere else in the church. In the St. James Prayer Garden, these flagstones are imported from Compostela, Spain, and they tie us to the pilgrimage site. We know from the Gospels that James spent time in the Garden of Gethsemane with Jesus after the Last Supper. These olive trees remind us of that cold, dark night when Jesus wept in fear and then finally in acceptance of his fate. James, like the rest of the apostles, slept through it all. The next day, Jesus walked the walk to Calvary and his cruel death on the cross. Our faith tells us that this last station was not the end, that God the Father raised Jesus to our everlasting benefit as the Christ. The Christ lives in us today, much as he lived in James some 2,000 years ago. July 25th is the Feast of St. James. Although we have no direct writings of James, no gospel or letter, we remain inspired by his clear dedication to Jesus. Jesus called James son of thunder, perhaps a good description of his personality. You don't get called son of thunder by staying in the background. This is our inspiration. James calls us all to make some thunder in the world by our witness and faith.